Hi everyone, my name is Eryn Bostwick and I am a lecturer at Cleveland State University. I want to start off by first thanking Dr. Jasmine Austin for inviting me to be a part of the Scholar Strike Conference, and also thank her and her team for putting this together. I also want to take a moment to position myself as a white, middle-class, cisgendered female and recognize that this position limits my views and understanding. With that in mind, what I'm going to talk about today is primarily directed towards other white teachers, other people with similar privileges to my own, because I want to talk about how we can use our privilege and position to be anti-racist in our teaching, specifically focused on supporting our Black students and students from other marginalized communities. So what I want to first start off by talking about is why support is so important, and then I'm going to give us 4 different things that we can do to make sure we're supporting our Black students. So let's start off by talking about why we should be focused so much on support. Well, data consistently shows a graduation gap in higher education based on race and ethnicity, and that gap is even larger when you take job prospects after college into account. And altogether, this suggests students of color have less opportunity after graduation, and then of course are less likely to actually graduate with an undergraduate degree. So as faculty who want equity and not just equality, we need to be asking ourselves what we can do at the university level to help close this gap. Now keep in mind as we move forward that this is just part of the puzzle. What we're talking about here are institutional and systemic issues. So of course we need to be doing things outside of our classrooms as well, like voting in a way that makes sure those in power are dedicated to dismantling systems of white supremacy instead of supporting them. But for the 10 minutes that we have, I want to focus on what we can do within our classrooms and within our universities and institutions specifically. Here's why I want to focus on that. Researchers at the Urban Institute were looking into how Pasadena City College in California reduced graduation inequities for their institution. And after scrutinizing all of the data and dozens of policies, what they found is that there were some policies both in the classroom and institutionally that helped to minimize the graduation inequity gap. You can read more about this in an article published in Politico in September 2019, but I'm going to highlight 2 important policies. One was that biology professors erased a rule banning late assignments or makeup exams. They did this in order to help accommodate low-income students who have to juggle both work and school. And by getting rid of that very strict policy, they were able to support their students and help them succeed. Another thing that the university did is to put together a faculty book club where faculty members came together and read and learned about issues surrounding stereotyping, discrimination, and racism. So in essence, the school used a 2-prong approach where they educated faculty about the issues, and then faculty were able to institute policies at the classroom level to help support their marginalized students. And again, those are only 2 things out of multiple things that they did, but it shows you how important support can be in closing that graduation inequity gap. So with that in mind, what are things that we can do as educators in our classrooms and institutionally to help support our Black students and students from other marginalized communities? 1, I'm going to talk about 4. Our first is that we need to diversify our syllabi and our course content in general. So this means we need to make sure that our class content covers the experiences and expertise of people of color, not just white men, which is what's so common. And then when we discuss this content in class, we need to make sure we're not putting pressure on our students of color to lead the discussion and or be the representative for their racial or ethnic group. We are the teachers, so we need to be the ones leading the discussions. Now, when I do this in my classes, I always try to recognize my position before I begin the conversation. And I admit that my understanding is limited because of my position, but say that as a teacher, it's my responsibility to lift up these voices and talk about these experiences so that all of my students are exposed to different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing the world, kind of getting out of their own perspective and engaging in perspective taking and hopefully at the end of the day, empathy. So, of course, there are hopefully some benefits to other students, including white students, when it comes to learning about these things. But since we're focusing right now on supporting our Black students, by diversifying our class content and our syllabi, we're lifting up their voices and experiences. We're showing them that we care and we want to help them and make sure that we're not just focused on the experiences of white people. This is something that we can do regardless of the courses that we teach, right? Have this representation and say, hey, I see you, I hear you, I'll never understand because of my position, but I'm going to do what I can to make sure that these voices are lifted up and that I'm responsible for exposing all of the class to these voices. Second thing, we need to check our own biases. So according to a study cited in a Washington Post article, when a white teacher and a Black teacher evaluate the same Black student, the white teacher is 30% less likely to say that that Black student is going to graduate from a 4-year college, and 40% less likely to say that that student will graduate from high school. Now, does this mean that a bunch of faculty are actively, meaning within our awareness, stereotyping and racially profiling our students? While that does happen, what's more likely, based on research into bias in teachers, is that this is more of an implicit process, meaning it's happening out of our awareness. We don't recognize that we have this bias and that our bias is influencing how we see our student body. But we need to make sure we stop and recognize these biases and get radically and uncomfortably honest about what we think and how we feel and what our biases might be. Because if we don't keep those biases in check, even if they're implicit, if we don't take the time to uncover them, what's going to happen is those biases will influence how we interact with our students. And then we know based on research that our interaction and the support we give to our students influences their achievement in our classroom in terms of like grades and things like that, right? So we don't want to let these biases, again, even if we're unaware of them, hurt our students, specifically our students of color and those from marginalized communities. So we have to get uncomfortable, we have to be open, and we have to be honest. That way, when we identify those biases, we can stop them from influencing our teaching as much as we can. Third, we need to be talking about race and issues surrounding race in class. Even if our class content doesn't cover race specifically, like maybe you're teaching a class in math or the hard sciences or something, right? We need to make sure that we have conversations about these types of things. So for example, let's say you're trying to diversify your syllabus, but you can't find many scholars of color to highlight in the literature. And you're in like a hard sciences or math class, so you're trying to figure out how to integrate these conversations into your course. You can talk about that as a problem and use it as a way to discuss institutional racism and white supremacy in academia and how that acts as a gatekeeper, keeping scholars of color and their voices suppressed. It's a perfect way to talk about that, right? For me, I teach communication classes, so in every class I teach, I make sure I highlight perception and everything that influences our perception, including our own biases, and encourage my students to uncover the biases that they might have and think very critically about how those biases influence how they interpret the world around them and how they see other people. So I make sure I talk about that in my classes. Again, this can help your students feel heard and help them recognize like, hey, this teacher cares, right? They're taking time to talk about these things and make sure that we're not just sweeping them under the rug and ignoring them. And then the nice bonus of that is that the other students in your class get to learn and increase their knowledge, which might help them on their own anti-racist journey should they choose to go that way. And we all hope that they will. And then fourth, we need to let our students know that we believe in them. So be a champion for your students. Tell them you believe in them. And institute policies consistent with that rhetoric. Given the large biases that we've talked about that teachers have and how those biases inform our interactions with our students, some students might never have had a teacher that told them they could succeed. So we need to make sure that we're doing that for our students. Now, this won't fix everything. Absolutely not. It's just one piece of a puzzle. And we need to make sure we're not taking this idea and then going forward and acting like a white savior. By supporting our students, we're not the ones that are fixing everything, right? By supporting them, we're not going to go and all of a sudden their life is going to be perfect with no roadblocks. What we do when we support is provide our students with encouragement as a tool, and then they're going to be the ones that build themselves up. And then at the institutional level, we can use our voice to demand institutional policies that address racial inequities in our universities. I hope that you, along with me, take these 4 pieces of information and other things, and this year and every school year moving forward, that we take the time and do what we can to be anti-racist teachers and use our anti-racism to support our students both in the classroom and at the institutional level. Thank you.